All right, welcome to our review of completing the square back from Algebra 2. And I know in Algebra 2 you completed the square for a couple different things. One is you solved quadratics with them, but we're not going to solve quadratics with these. We're going to use completing the square to write quadratics in a way that's going to help us find important parts of our conic sections. So things will be slightly different here. So let's take a look at completing the square. So when you complete the square, first of all, you want your x's isolated. So I want these to stay, and I need to get this 15 moved to the other side. So the x squared stays, the negative 10x stays, and I subtract 15 from both sides. And now what I want to do is I want to complete the square. And completing the square involves the actual shape of a square. I want this x squared to be part of the inside area of the square. And I want this negative 10x to be part of the inside area of a square. Now remember, the inside area of a square, squares have equal sides. So this negative 10x has to be split equally into these two squares. So we split negative 10x into two parts by dividing it by 2. So there's a negative 5x and there's a negative 5x. And if we go to factor this, remember this is the area of this little square, and it's a square, so this side is going to be x and that side is going to be x. And this side here would have to be negative 5, because negative 5 times x is negative 5x. And this side here would also be negative 5, and this is a square. So if you notice, this side is equal to that side. Now, to complete the square, what would this box here have to be? Well, this box here has one side negative 5, has another side negative 5. It would have to be 25. So to complete the square, I need 25 added to the left side. And obviously, you know from Algebra 1, you can't just add something to the left side. You have to do it to both sides. So this left side now can be factored, and it factors into x minus 5 times x minus 5, or x minus 5 squared, and the right side is 21. Notice we completed a perfect square. We made one side a perfect square. So let's try this again. Here's another problem. Now, the problem we have here, what makes this one slightly different, is in order to complete the square, you really want this number right here to be a 1, and it's a 6. So first things first, I'm going to boot this 15 out. I'm going to move it to the other side. And then in order to make this a 1, I have two options. I can divide everything by 6, or I can factor or pull out a 6. And in this case, with conics, you're going to want to pull it out. And you'll see why when we get to parabolas and ellipses and hyperbolas. So I'm going to pull that 6 out. And I have 6 times the quantity of x squared plus 2x equals 15. So now it's time to complete the square. We have an x squared, that's going to go in this first box. And obviously to get x squared, we need x times x. We have a 2x that has to be split evenly between these two boxes. So if I take 2x and I divide it into two parts, 2x divided by 2, each one is x. And then that means that this side here, if this side here was x, this side here would have to be a 1, and so would that. And so when we complete the square, this missing square right here is 1 by 1. Its area is 1. So I need to add 1 to this left-hand side. So what do I need to do to the right-hand side? I need to add, 6. Now wait a minute, where'd that 6 come from? Well, if you think about it, this 1 isn't really a 1. See this 6 out in front? This is really a 6. So if I really added 6 to the left-hand side, so I had to balance it out by adding 6 to the right-hand side. So when we finish this and we complete the square, we want this side to be factored. So we get 6 times the quantity of x plus 1 squared, see x plus 1 times x plus 1, equals 21. Well, let's try it again. This time we have a 4 out in front, and you may be thinking already, ooh, we get to work with fractions. That's true. That's the special treat we get here. So let's see if we can complete the square. Why don't you pause this for a second and see what you can do. Well, welcome back. Hopefully the first thing you did is you added that 9 to the other side. and then you pulled out a 4. And we divide everything by 4 here. Again, we're pulling it out. We get 10/4 or 5/2. So now it's time to complete the square. So we come over here to the side, we set up our square. We have x squared, which means we need x times x. And we're going to take this 5/2 and divide it into 2 equal squares. So 5/2 divided by 2 is 5/4. So if this side here is x, what's this side here have to be? So we get 5/4 x. Well, that's 5/4, and this one's 5/4. Again, notice it's a square, so these two sides are equal. And this final square has an area of 25/16. So I add 25/16, although you and I both know that's not really a 25/16, is it? When I multiply through by 4, it's really 25/4. So when I write this as a fully completed factored problem, I get 4 times the quantity of x plus 5/4. Notice this side is x plus 5/4, so is that, squared equals 61/4. Well, in your notes, you had a couple problems, the last couple, that involved completing the square. So let's see if you can do those. So the first thing is, I want my x's together, I want my y's together, and I want this 17 booted out. So let's group the x's together. Whoops, okay, you shouldn't have seen that. Let's group these x's together. Let's group these y's together. And let's move this 17 to the other side. Just ignore this +1. Came in a little early on that one. So now what we have to do is we have to complete the square twice. So we have to complete the square once for the x's and once for the y's. So let's see if we can complete the square for the x's here. Let's see if I can find my square. There we go. And we're going to complete the square for the y's, so we need another square for the y's. Now the x's, we have an x squared, and we have 2x, and that 2x is divided into these two squares evenly. So to get x squared, I need an x and an x. And if this side is x, then this side right here would have to be a 1, and that's a 1. And that's where this first 1 comes from, which we saw early and kind of ruined the surprise. So we have a +1 here. We better put a +1 over here. Now to complete the squares for the y's, we have y squared. We have to take this 10y and divide it into 2 equal parts, there and there. And of course, if we have y squared, we get that by taking y times y. And if this side of the square is y, then this side over here would have to be 5. As with this, remember it's a square, these two sides should be equal. And to complete this square, this empty block must be 25. So I need to add 25 to the left and 25 to the right. Now, in order to make this into a form that's useful to us, I want this fully factored, and I want that fully factored. And over here you have what becomes your radius squared. The last problem in our notes did involve fractions, so this was a good one. And we want to do the same thing. We want to group our x's together, we want to group our y's together, and we want to move this 1/4 to the other side. So we have our x's grouped, we have our y's grouped, and we have this 1/4 moved to the other side. So let's go in here and let's complete the square twice. We've got to complete the square once for the x's and once for the y's. So that can be our x's, and somewhere in here, whoop, that could be our y's. So x squared, we need an x squared in this box. We get that by taking x times x. We have to take this -1x and split it evenly into 2 boxes. So -1 divided into 2 equal parts, -1/2 and -1/2. We figure out that this missing piece is -1/2, as is that. And of course, what's -1/2 times -1/2? It's 1/4. And so I'm going to add 1/4 to this side I'm going to add a fourth to the right-hand side. We're going to do the same thing in this y box. We have y squared. We take this positive 1 and we split it evenly into those two equal parts. That makes this a half and that a half, and this gives us a fourth. So I add a fourth to the right-hand side, add a fourth to the other side, and finally we complete the square. X minus a half quantity squared plus y plus a half quantity squared equals a fourth. Well, why don't you guys go into your practice now and see if you can do those practice problems. Stick with completing the square and make sure you check your answers when you're done. Have fun.